Story 1. The Midnight Passenger. It was past midnight when Jamie, a young rideshare driver, took what he thought would be one of his last rides for the night. He was exhausted and ready to head home, but when a new request pinged, he reluctantly accepted. The pickup location was in a quiet, isolated area on the edge of town. When he arrived, the street was unusually dark, with only a single dim streetlight illuminating a bus stop where a woman in an old-fashioned black dress waited, her face obscured by the hood of her long, heavy coat. Jamie hesitated for a second. Something about the woman felt off, but the night was late, and he didn't want to abandon the fare. He unlocked the doors, and she got in without a word, slipping into the back seat and sitting perfectly still. Jamie tried to make small talk to ease his nerves, but she said nothing. All he could hear was her steady breathing. As they drove down the empty roads, Jamie checked the rearview mirror. He noticed something strange. The woman seemed to be getting paler, almost translucent. He brushed it off, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim light. But soon, an icy chill spread through the car, and an overwhelming scent of decay filled the air. Nervously, Jamie glanced into the rearview mirror again. The woman was gone. In a panic, he slammed on the brakes, his heart racing as he whipped around to check the back seat. The woman was nowhere to be seen. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, struggling to breathe, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new notification. He looked down to see the message, "Drop-off completed," and a chilling address appeared on his screen. It was the cemetery just a mile down the road. Fighting back fear, Jamie drove to the cemetery, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. When he arrived, he saw the outline of the woman standing among the gravestones, watching him with hollow, piercing eyes. In a panic, he sped off, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Jamie never worked nights again, but he was haunted by her image every time he looked in his rearview mirror. Story 2. The Whispers in the Walls. Mia had just moved into her new apartment, a cozy place in an old building downtown. It was perfect. High ceilings, large windows, and a charmingly creaky wooden floor. But from the first night, she noticed something strange. As she lay in bed in the silence, she began to hear faint whispers coming from inside the walls. She brushed it off, blaming thin walls or maybe the neighbors on the other side. But each night, the whispers got clearer, filling her room with soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to be talking to her. When she leaned in close to the wall, she could make out a few fragmented words, and her blood ran cold when she heard what sounded like her name. The voices grew more insistent, whispering at all hours. It was as if they were trying to get her attention, to draw her closer. One night, after weeks of restless sleep and constant fear, Mia couldn't take it anymore. She decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and a hammer, prying open a small section of the wall near the baseboard where the whispers seemed loudest. The musty smell of decay hit her immediately, and as the dust settled, she shone her flashlight into the gap. Inside, Mia found a small compartment filled with old, yellowed photographs. Each photo featured people she didn't recognize, strangers with wide, haunting eyes. And in every picture, without fail, there was something chillingly familiar in the background. The room she was standing in, her apartment, as it had looked decades before. Her hands shook as she flipped through the photos until she found a final image that stopped her heart. It was a photograph of herself, taken from within the walls, dated 3 days prior. In the image, she was sleeping in her bed, and a shadowy figure was standing beside her, watching. Frozen with terror, she dropped the photos and backed away from the wall. The whispers grew louder, furious, filling the room until they became almost deafening. She ran out of the apartment that night and never returned, leaving everything she owned behind. Her neighbors later claimed that she had become another whisper in the walls, her voice joining the others that haunted that old building. To this day, new tenants report the same eerie whispers, and it's rumored that the walls keep secrets of all who have lived there, each voice a piece of the building's dark, living history. Story 3. The Attic Visitor. In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, Mark and his wife Lisa had recently moved into an old Victorian house. It was charming, with antique fixtures and a vast, mysterious attic. The previous owners had warned them that the house had its quirks, but they hadn't thought much of it until strange things started happening. At night, they'd hear footsteps above them in the attic, pacing back and forth, slow and deliberate. Mark assumed it was old pipes or shifting beams. But when the footsteps began to turn into scratching noises, Lisa became uneasy. It was as if someone or something was moving things around up there. They both decided it was probably just a squirrel or raccoon and agreed to check it out the next day. The following morning, Mark climbed up the narrow attic stairs, flashlight in hand, his heart pounding. The attic was freezing and filled with dust-covered boxes. He shone his flashlight around and found nothing unusual, though he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. When he turned to leave, his flashlight caught something odd. A set of small, child-sized handprints in the dust on the attic floor, leading to a dark corner of the room. Disturbed, Mark told Lisa, who suggested they bring in a pest control expert. The exterminator searched the attic thoroughly, but found no signs of animals. Instead, he pointed out the strange fact that the handprints seemed recent, clearer and cleaner than the surrounding dust. Later that night, they both lay awake, listening intently. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps right above their heads, followed by a child's soft, barely audible giggle. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. In the morning, they found one of the attic boxes in the hallway, its contents scattered across the floor, as if it had been rummaged through. That evening, they called a paranormal investigator who spent hours walking through the house, murmuring prayers and recording everything. Afterward, he shared his findings, his face pale with unease. "There's something here," he said. "A child, perhaps, but something darker too. It's attached to this house." They decided to sell the house and leave the following week. But the final night was the worst. As they packed, they heard a loud crash from the attic. Mark, against his better judgment, went up to see. In the center of the attic was an old, dusty doll he had never seen before, its head twisted to face the door. As he turned to leave, he heard a whisper so close it seemed to be right in his ear. "Stay and play with me." Mark ran out, slamming the door behind him, and they left that very night, never looking back. Local rumors say that anyone who moves into that house hears the same child's footsteps in the attic, and if they stay long enough, they too find the doll waiting for them, beckoning them to stay and play forever.